Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Octagon Jordan, back in your life. And today we're going to discuss Charles "Du Bronx" Oliveira and what's going on with his career. We've heard numerous announcements on Twitter. Oh, he's fighting Volkanovski, Gamrot, moving up in weight to face Colby Covington. He's fighting Benoit Saint Denis. He's fighting Dan the Hangman Hooker. What's really going on? Let's dissect all these announcements. Let's look at Charles Oliveira's recent tweet. Let's look at Charles Oliveira's career, kind of pinpoint how he kind of goes about his career, when he takes fights, which fights that he takes, and try to predict what his next fight is going to be. So let's do that. Before we do that, let's crack into our beverages. I'm going to do some beer reviews very quick. I'm going to, or very soon, I should say, in the future. I'm going to compare Forged Irish Stout to Guinness. I'm going to do a number of different alcohol reviews on the channel. Try, spice it up, do a couple different things. So, Cape May Brewing right here. Can't give you all the secret hints as to which beer it is, but let's crack in and let's take a look. So, it's good. Yeah, so basically, there was rumors that Oliveira was going to fight Covington. He's going to move up in weight, 170. Colby Covington's been calling him out, as he likes to do. Call out the 155ers, call out the old heads, the Wonderboy Thompsons, the Tyron Woodleys, Dustin Poirier, Charles Oliveira. So it looked like that for a minute. But now we have Volkanovski saying he wants to fight Charles Oliveira. So that's a rumor that's been floating around, Volkanovski, he wants to get active again. He knows he's getting older in his career. He's been taking some time off for the double concussions. He knows that he's going to have to wait for Max to fight Ilia Topuria, so he's going to be on the shelf for a minute. He doesn't want to fight another featherweight fight because he doesn't want to risk losing. He has a championship matchup already locked up. It just might not be next. Max Holloway's clearly next after what he did to Justin Gaethje at UFC 300. So Volkanovski's not next at featherweight, although he doesn't have to fight again at featherweight for a title shot. But he wants to stay active, so he wants to go up to 155. He's eyeing up Charles Oliveira. I saw something about maybe a Justin Gaethje. I saw a couple other different, Michael Chandler at UFC 303. Volkanovski offered to step in there, but ultimately, I don't think he faces Charles Oliveira. That doesn't do much for Charles Oliveira. Makhachev already beat Volkanovski twice. Topuria, 145er, just beat Volkanovski. He's coming off 2 L's in a row. That doesn't do much for Oliveira, so I don't think that's going to be the case. Next rumor we've seen is Oliveira versus Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker has recently come out that he has been offered Charles Oliveira for the UFC 305 card in Perth, Australia. Dan Hooker said that he has signed the bout agreement, and it's been rumored. It's getting announced here. Home of Fight, couple different MMA Uncensored. Couple different accounts, are proclaiming that this is the fight. Dan Hooker came out and said he was sent a contract. What a banger of a fight that would be. Holy shit, stylistically, that's a fucking war. That's a banger. That's similar to Oliveira Gaethje, Oliveira Poirier, which are just amazing scraps. Hooker's all heart, all grit, all fucking blood and guts. That would be an amazing scrap. Oliveira came out and said that he was never offered this fight. At least that's what I kind of, extracted from his tweet. But let's look what else is rumored. We got Mateusz Gamrot, which makes sense. Mateusz Gamrot's coming off a bunch of good wins. Rafael Fiziev, Rafael Dos Anjos. He's clearing out all the Rafaels. He's fucking them all up. Rafael, raffle these fucking balls in your mouth. Blah, 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 blah. Raffle these fucking nuts. But Gamrot fucking blows. I'd highly doubt that UFC wants to give Oliveira, an exciting fighter, a star in the company, a former champion, give him to Mateusz Melatonin Gamrot just to wrestle fuck him, similar to Arman Tsarukyan. Highly doubt UFC's actually looking at this matchup, although it does make sense ranking-wise. Let's see the other rumor. Charles Oliveira against Benoit Saint Denis. MMA crazy. La Combat Crazy is, they're reporting this. Charles Oliveira against Benoit Saint Denis, very close. UFC Paris, September 28th, per Robin Watrant. As a matter of fact, Benoit already signed the contract, which is funny because Dan Hooker said he signed his contract for August 17th. So it really comes down to when does Charles want to fight. September, August, July. What's the move? Obviously, he didn't take a bunch of damage in his last fight against Arman Tsarukyan. He wasn't bleeding. He didn't get TKO'd. He didn't get dropped. He didn't get submitted. I'm sure he had a couple bumps and bruises. So there's Charles Oliveira news bouncing around left and right. Let's see what Charles Oliveira himself had to say about this news. If I can find it. Hold on, bear with me here. That's not Charles Oliveira. Fuck that guy. Here we go. The Bronx. Charles the Bronx. This champion doesn't news. Charles the Bronx. He said, people have been booking fights for me that I'm not aware of. Metaverse fights? Maybe. So obviously UFC is in contact with Charles Oliveira. That's pretty clear. Obviously, they always want Charles Oliveira to fight. Every time there's a big card, they want him to fight. He's on kind of a losing streak, although not really. He's lost two out of his last three to Islam Makhachev and Arman Tsarukyan. He beat Beneil Dariush in between those two. Had a good showing against Arman Tsarukyan. Just got out-wrestled, got out-strengthed, out-muscled. Got held down, He had a couple good submission attempts. The guillotine was pretty good. The Darce choke at the end was pretty good. Arman had some good defense to it, but Oliveira really needs to prove himself. That's kind of always been his Achilles heel, has been the wrestling. People that can wrestle can really fuck him up. Paul Felder fucked him up. Islam Makhachev fucked him up. Arman Tsarukyan didn't fuck him up, but, he beat him on points. Charles Oliveira obviously has good striking, has good jiu-jitsu, but he's not the strongest guy for 155. He moved up from 145. He's not the biggest guy. So he needs to work on his wrestling a little bit. He's still young. I think he's 33, maybe pushing 34 at this point. I still see some title shots in his future. If in a dream world, a fantasy world, if I could book Charles Oliveira, I would do Oliveira, Michael Chandler 2, the rematch. What an epic, amazing, out-of-this-world fight the first fight was. I would love to see it again. I would pay $100 and $150 to watch that on pay-per-view. One fight card. I don't give a fuck. PFL would die for Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler. So that's a fight I really want to see. But Charles Oliveira, he's always been picky with his matchups. He's been picky with his career. I don't want to say he ducked the Makhachev rematch because he did have that cut, but it's very interesting. The timing of that cut, a week ahead, sparring with no headgear. It was just interesting, very interesting. The fact that he turned down a couple fights after the Dariush fight, he had to wait a year, UFC 300 to face Arman Tsarukyan. Very interesting career for old the Bronx. But this is what I'm thinking that he's going to do. Actually, before I dive into my theory about what's next for Charles Oliveira, let's look at his career. Did I hit fucking? Yes, I did. Thank God. All right, let's. Oh, it's saying I got to plug in my PC. I still got some time. Yeah, I still got some time. All right, let's look at his career. Charles do Bronx, 34-10. Obviously a former lightweight champion, has fought the best of the best, has fought everybody. Give me 1 second. Let me plug in my laptop. Look at his record while you're waiting. All right, I'm back. I am fucking back, baby. So, yeah. This guy's fought everybody. Tony Ferguson, Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, beat them all. Islam Makhachev beat Beneil Dariush and lost to Arman Tsarukyan by split decision. So, he's being calculated at this point in time. How old is Charles Oliveira? I know I said he's 33. He's 34 now. So he's 34 years of age, former lightweight champion. I'm sure he's getting paid well. I'm sure he has a good contract. Obviously, he's on like his 7th, 8th, fucking 9th contract. This dude's been in the UFC since UFC on Fox, UFC versus, UFC 124 against Jim Miller, UFC Fight Night, UFC versus 2. He's been in the UFC since 2010, 14 years in the UFC. He came in the UFC when he was 20 years old. He fought Darren Elkins, UFC versus 2. UFC Fight Night 22. UFC 124 against Jim Miller. And he just fought on UFC 300. It's fucking craziness. Donald Cerrone, Cub Swanson, Frankie Edgar, Nick Lenz, Max Holloway, Anthony Pettis, Paul Felder, Jim Miller again, who he beat. Nick Lenz again, who he beat. Jared Gordon fucked his ass up. Kevin Lee, fuck off. Tony Ferguson, Michael Chandler, Mr. Chandler, 185. Dustin the Diamond Poirier, Justin the Highlight Gaethje, Islam Makhachev, Beneil Dariush fucked his ass up. When Dariush was actually on a winning streak, and now Arman Tsarukyan lost by split decision. I want to see a rematch with Arman. I want to see it 5 rounds, but he's being very tactical with his career at this point. So if we think about it, let's look at the lightweight rankings and see who we think Charles Oliveira is actually going to fight. He's not going to fight Colby Covington. There's no point. He's not going to fight Alexander Volkanovski. There's no point. So let's look at it. Let's see. Right now, he's currently ranked 2nd lightweight. Already fought Gaethje. He's not going to fight Gaethje. Poirier, he might retire. Gamrot, it's a possibility. I mean, it makes sense. Actually, a good matchup for Oliveira. I feel like Gamrot's really well versed in the wrestling, but he's not as strong as Arman. He's got great technique, very good takedowns, great stamina. It's kind of like Merab with the takedown or with the stamina, the cardio. But I'm not sure exactly how defensively sound he is when it comes to jiu-jitsu. So I could see Gamrot getting subbed, maybe getting starched out, similar to Dariush. You know, same kind of game plan Dariush used against Gamrot. Michael Chandler, would love to see them run it back. Benny's number 7, Rafael Fiziev, Max Holloway, which is criminal. Max Holloway's ranked number 9 after he just KO'd the number 3 guy. I mean, it just makes no sense. But Dan Hooker sitting at 11, Benoit Saint Denis sitting at 12. So we got Alexander Volkanovski, who's a featherweight. We got Mateusz Gamrot, number 5, Dan Hooker, number 11, Benoit Saint Denis, number 12. So who does Charles Oliveira have the most to gain against, and who's the best stylistic matchup? So if he fought Gamrot, might be a decent matchup, but I could see it being a boring fight. Similar to the Arman fight, a lot of grappling, a lot of wrestling. Oliveira on guard, trying to get some different submissions. Gamrot doing his classic melatonin moves. You know, same shit he did against RDA and against every other fucking fighter that he's fought. So I don't see UFC booking that, even if, you know, that's the highest ranked guy, number 5. But at this point, Oliveira is so well established that he doesn't need to fight high-ranked people. He could fight anybody. He could fight Bobby Green. If he gets a win, he could get a title shot. I mean, it's that simple. So if you're in the Oliveira camp, you got to think, who can I get the most fans off of? Who can I have the best fight with that people are going to be talking about, the best performance against? And who do I have the best chance of winning? I don't think that person's Gamrot. Is it Benoit Saint Denis? I don't really think so either. I don't think Saint Denis has a big enough name. I think his biggest win's Matt Frevola. Thiago Moises, you know, he just lost to Dustin Poirier, who Charles Oliveira beat. Benoit Saint Denis is a grappler for the most part. I really don't see that being too schmitten for our boy the Bronxs. So, you know, the fight that I am going to predict is next for Charles Oliveira is right here. Oliveira versus Dan Hooker, Perth, UFC 305, main card, pay-per-view. You know, high publicity spot, a lot of eyeballs, and it's a perfect matchup for Oliveira. It's going to be an action fight. Dan Hooker, he, you know, live by the sword, die by the sword type of guy. Striker for the most part. Has been submitted. Islam Makhachev submitted him. I think it's a great matchup for Oliveira. I think it's going to be a banger fight. I think it's going to be money. I think it's going to be similar to the Poirier-Gaethje matchups. They stick on the feet for a little bit. They hurt each other. Oliveira might get dropped. Hooker gets excited. He jumps in the guard. Something blah, blah, blah might happen. Shout out Don Davis, blah, 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 blah. But I think this is the matchup. Hooker has the biggest name out of Benoit Saint Denis, Mateusz Gamrot. Hooker's well-known. The fans love Hooker. This would be on the main card. It's a stylistically friendly matchup for Oliveira. Hooker doesn't have the best grappling or jiu-jitsu. And if it does stay on the feet, it's going to be a banger. It's going to be a war. It's going to be one for the fans. So I believe this one out of all the options, but it's very interesting how we've gotten 5, 6, 7 Charles Oliveira, you know, fantasy matchups that have popped up on Twitter here. But I do believe this one. I think they're looking at Dan Hooker, Charles Oliveira, because like I said, if you just look at the rankings, Gamrot fight, yeah, he's higher ranked than Hooker, but that's a boring fight. That's a boring fight. He's not a big name. It's not going to draw. The fans aren't going to be excited. Michael Chandler, sure, but I think Chandler's still waiting on McGregor. If Chandler tells UFC, hey, I'm done waiting, book Chandler Oliveira immediately. Book the rematch immediately over any fight. Book it. Pay-per-view main event. I don't give a fuck. Who cares about a title? Yeah, other than that, I think that's the next move for our boy Charles the Bronx. So we'll see what happens. But it is funny. You know, I wouldn't mind the Benoit Saint Denis matchup just to kind of fraud check Benoit Saint Denis a little bit more. Obviously, he'd probably get ginned again. Mateusz Gamrot, I need to see more out of you, man. I need to see more personality. I need to see you on social media. I need to see a slightly more advanced fight style. You know, kind of reminds me of Jailton Almeida, just kind of a one-trick pony. And when he goes up against that guy that can stop it, a la Benio Dariush, it doesn't work that well, and there's no plan B. So we got to see some more evolution out of Mateusz Gamrot, work on the character a little bit, work on the aura a little bit. But for now, I think the next time we see Charles Oliveira is against Dan Hooker, August 17th, UFC 305 in Australia. And it's finna be a banger, boys. It's finna be a fucking slapper. Paige Van Zandt style. Paige Van Zandt style. Power slap that hoe.